Hello and welcome back to the Jet Press Podcast. My name is Justin Freed, and I'm joined as always by my man Mike Luciano. Mike, what's going on, dude? How you doing?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good. We are fresh off the New York Jets 2023 draft class, which, if you were tuning in on Fansided's live NFL draft show, you got to see among a parade of other talented guests, this doofus analyze a couple of the picks, which we will get really in detail to later in the show. We do have a couple extra little quick breaking news items to get you all caught up on first. But before we do any of that, you can always find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube at the Jet Press. There is a ton of great YouTube shorts and prospect interviews over there. First off, I got to say shout out to 49ers fans because Joey Fisher signed as an undrafted free agent there, and our interview blew up. So thanks, Niners fans, for that. You can also check our interview with Jarek Bernard Converse, who the Jets picked in the 6th round. Justin was all over that with a very good interview. And little sneak peek, we might hear some quotes from Carter Warren, who was the Jets' 4th round draft selection this year. So keep an eye on that. You can find all that stuff over on YouTube. Let's get into this is a show I'm really pumped for because there's been a lot of goings on in the Jets world, starting with Randall Cobb, yet another signing. It's something that we kind of thought would happen because Aaron Rodgers, even though he said he didn't give the Jets that list, they've mysteriously signed a lot of players on that list of guys he would like to play with, one of which obviously being Randall Cobb, who Rodgers has really really dug his feet in and supported for years and years and years. That's his guy. 10 years in Green Bay over 2 different stints with varying degrees of success. Like back in his prime, Randall Cobb was a 1,000-yard receiver at his absolute peak. Beyond that, he was a lot of 800, 900-yard seasons, even though he kept getting banged up. He was productive. At this point in his career, he's going to be 33 in August, and he hasn't had more than 500 yards receiving since 2019. So you're really not signing Randall Cobb at this point to be a big element of the passing game. He's a depth option. He's a veteran leader for young guys, and that's what the Jets did. They brought him in on a really cheap contract. And then for some reason, the Twitter sphere has all these wild theories and tangents about how the Jets are all of a sudden bending over backwards to Aaron Rodgers. Like, that's a bad thing. You want to get Aaron Rodgers guys he likes. Oh, my God. Like, they're doing that. They're signing him to be a featured option in the passing game, which he very clearly is not. I don't even know how you'd make that connection, knowing who the Jets have and who they signed. It's really strange. So if you're a Jets fan, and you're a Jet Press listener, so you're a smart, educated Jets fan, do not listen to these people who are all in hysterics about the Jets signing Randall Cobb. This is a backup. This is a depth piece. He's probably not going to play special teams, but this is a guy who's going to be as valued for his presence in the locker room as he is on the field. The fact that it's been twisted like this is really strange to me.
I have spent a lot of the day, far too much of the day, going back and forth with it's not even just Packers fans. It's not even just like Packers reporters or analysts. It's national guys too, like Pete Prisco and others who are just saying really just ridiculous things about the Randall Cobb signing, about the Billy Turner signing as well, because that's another depth piece that the Jets added who has experience with Aaron Rodgers and Nathaniel Hackett too. Like, I think that's an overlooked part of this. They're not just bringing in these guys for Rodgers. It's also because they have experience working in the same offensive scheme with Nathaniel Hackett. Just some of the takes that I've seen today, and I want to list off a few of these because I've responded to some of them. One of them was from a few hours ago. Pete Prisco tweeted out, "Getting older and slower at receiver isn't usually a good plan." Of course, this is referring to the Jets wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 6. This is referring to a guy who likely I don't want to say likely, but there's a chance he's not even active on game days. Like, there's no guarantee that Randall Cobb is going to be an active contributor in the offense or on special teams for the Jets. He's fighting with Denzel Mims right now for that wide receiver 5 spot. That's who he's referring to here. That's the kind of analysis we're getting. I can't imagine any other team signing a wide receiver 5 and there being this much blowback because of it. I've also seen plenty of people saying something along the lines of, "Oh, Aaron Rodgers complained about not having weapons in Green Bay, and then they just went out and signed all of his weapons. He has the same supporting cast." No, he doesn't. Last time I checked, Garrett Wilson is not a former Green Bay Packer.
Breece Hall.
Breece Hall, Tyler Conklin, CJ Uzama, Corey Davis, Mecole Hardman. None of these guys have played for the Packers. The Jets' entire running back room, Izzy Abanikanda, Michael Carter, Zonovan Knight, none of these guys played for the Packers. This is not the same. This is not the same skill position group. It's not even close. All they signed was Al Lazard. That's the only guy who's going to actually play a significant role this year. He is projected to be the Jets wide receiver 2. And if you asked me going into the offseason, before they even got Aaron Rodgers, I said he was probably near the top of my list. He made a lot of sense for the Jets, regardless of whether they got Aaron Rodgers, regardless of whether they hired Nathaniel Hackett. Lazard fit exactly what they were looking for in this offense. That's the only notable piece that they have signed to pair with Aaron Rodgers. Randall Cobb is a backup slot receiver who is, by the way, an upgrade over Braxton Berrios in that role. So it makes sense, even aside from Aaron Rodgers, to sign someone like Randall Cobb to mentor other guys on the roster and to fill an important depth role. Billy Turner might not make the team. He's competing for the top backup offensive tackle job, but you drafted Carter Warren. You have Max Mitchell coming back. You re-signed Cedric Ogbuehi. That's a loaded tackle room, which we'll get more into that. It doesn't make any sense. The narratives don't make any sense. It's just people that want to further the LOL Jets narrative. That's all it is. They're talking about bending over backwards for Aaron Rodgers when they signed a backup slot receiver and a backup offensive tackle who might not make the roster.
Anyway. It's just that because the Jets, deservedly so, have earned this reputation as a bunch of clowns over the years and have done things that have blown up in their face. It seems like everybody's just anticipating, like, all right, something's going to go wrong. So that way they can look like they're ahead of the game. Like, everybody obviously knew. Very clear. It's the Zach Wilson thing. Everybody knew Zach Wilson was going to be awful, except specifically the New York Jets. That's what people would have you believe. It's really strange and really frustrating. Like, you'd think once you get Aaron Rodgers, you're kind of past that, but now, nope, it's LOL Jets. Like, did the Packers really get LOL Packers when they kept re-signing Randall Cobb when he was very clearly not what he was?
Oh.
But the Jets did it. It frustrates you no end because, like, unless the Jets win a championship immediately, no matter what they do, they're always going to find the LOL Jets narrative. And I don't want to you could just say I'm like a complaining Jets fan a lot, but like with this team as it's constructed, like with Joe Douglas and Aaron Rodgers, like this is a completely, almost like a brand new slate. They've done nothing. This is not John Idzik. This is not the end of Mike Tannenbaum. This is not Todd Bowles' era where all that stuff would be perfectly fair game, if I'm being honest.
Where was this blowback when the Bucs did the same thing with Brady? Where was it when the Broncos did the same thing with Peyton Manning? There wasn't. People didn't give a crap like that. You didn't hear this.
No, you know what I saw? I even saw too where someone brought up the Bucs and Tampa, and then a guy went, "Oh yeah, well that's one example. That's an outlier." It's like,
there's two.
What do you want? Like, what do you want here?
I responded to a tweet today that said this was in response to the Randall Cobb signing. Again, a backup slot receiver who likely at most will see 5 to 10 snaps a game in a healthy wide receiver room. Right? That's who this is responding to. Because this was the exact tweet. Quote, because bending over backwards to please a newly acquired superstar is a proven route to success. Two things. One,
yes.
In what world is signing a backup slot receiver bending over backwards? Two, yes, it is. It is a proven route to success. It has worked multiple times within the last decade. Like, what are we even talking about here? 2 of the last 10 Super Bowl winners have been because they did this exact thing. And the Jets have done it maybe to a lesser degree than those teams. It is wild, man. It is wild. These takes are crazy. I know it's May. We have many more months of these takes, but I'll say this. I'd rather this be the narrative. I'd rather people be looking at the Jets and being like, oh, they're bending over backwards for their future Hall of Fame quarterback than the Jets running it back with Zach Wilson or running it back with, or bringing in like a Gardner Minshew or someone. This is the better alternative. It's still annoying though.
Absolutely. Now, what the Jets also did to bend over backwards to Aaron Rodgers is sign Billy Turner to a 1-year contract. Again, a former Packer and I believe former Bronco when Hackett went over to Denver. So this is a Nathaniel Hackett guy and an Aaron Rodgers guy. They love him some Billy Turner. And that throws another new wrinkle into the offensive line room because the big offensive line news was Mekhi Becton not getting his 5th-year option picked up in a draft class where I believe they set the record for the fewest number of 5th-year options getting picked up. Becton was another one of them. And this was not really shocking to me. I feel like everybody was kind of expecting this because we haven't basically seen Becton on the field in 2 years. One thing that I'm a little puzzled by, and I'm not one of those guys who was just banging the table for an offensive lineman in the draft. I got it, but I I think it would have been a good move, but I understand there were other areas of need and other places they could have gone down, which they eventually did. But those guys actually have some legitimate, they have more ammunition and they have a bit stronger argument now because the Jets are doing this weird have it both ways thing with Mekhi Becton where they neglected to really pay for a high-end tackle. Even though they chased some guys, they never really sealed a deal on a high-end tackle to be the starter. And then they also didn't draft one. So that shows, well, they're very confident in Mekhi Becton. He's going to be great. All that's got to happen is he's just got to stay healthy. Sure thing. Then they also don't pick up his fifth-year option. So he's basically on a prove-it deal. So they're having this weird, like, we believe that you're going to be the one of the top protectors for Aaron Rodgers. That is a huge undertaking and a huge responsibility for a guy who basically hasn't played in 2 years. But also, we're not going to pick up your fifth-year option. We don't have that much confidence in you. It's a little bit of a weird thing they're doing here. I mean, I expect it because of the health. That doesn't make it any less of a confusing scenario to me.
I think this was the only feasible outcome to this situation. It's something that people saw coming for months. I don't think anybody was surprised, or nobody really should have been surprised when the Jets did not pick up Mekhi Becton's fifth-year option. Like you said, that 2020 draft class looks pretty bad in hindsight, right? At least the Jets.
COVID year, you couldn't really scout properly, so
right. And then unfortunately, that was Joe Douglas's first draft class, right? So that was a difficult time, I'm sure, for a lot of people in the NFL. But I'll say this: at least the Jets have a guy who we know is talented. It's just been major injury concerns with him. This was the only way they could go about this. There's no way you can pick up that option, which I believe was worth around 13.6 million, something like that, in 2024 for a guy who's played one game over the last 2 years. You can't do it. I'm sure the Jets are incredibly encouraged by the progress that Mekhi Becton has made this offseason. Per Rich Cimini, he's down over 50 pounds. He's put in the work. Like, he has really put in the work. And I'm very optimistic about how he's going to play this year. Much more optimistic than I was going into last year. Unfortunately, you need to see it. You need to prove it. He needs to go out there and prove it, not only that he can stay healthy, but that he could play at the level that he was for a lot of his rookie season, if not even better than that. They are trusting him with the starting role, or at least that's the presumption. I don't think they've actually called him a starter, and I don't think that that's necessarily set in stone. But the assumption is if he's healthy and he's not playing bad, like, he's going to start. Whether it's at left tackle or right tackle, that's to be determined, but most likely right tackle. Either way, I do think the addition of Billy Turner and addition of Carter Warren in the draft gives them, they have a lot of offensive tackle depth. And I was very vocal last year. I don't know if people who follow the Jet Press Twitter, I wrote some stuff, wrote articles about it. I was very vocal about how the Jets offensive tackle depth was really bad last summer. It was bad. It wasn't until they picked up Cedric Ogbuehi mid-season that I was like, okay, it's actually getting somewhere. And then they added Mike Remmers. It was actually quality depth by the end of the season. And obviously they lost. They had 7 different offensive tackles spend time on the IR. But going into the summer, I was very vocal. I was very critical of the Jets offensive tackle depth. Complete opposite this year. They have 6 NFL caliber, assuming that Carter Warren is an NFL caliber player. They have 6 NFL caliber offensive tackles on their roster. Those guys are not all making the team. You got Mekhi Becton, Dwayne Brown, Max Mitchell, Carter Warren, Billy Turner, Cedric Ogbuehi. Those are 6 NFL caliber players. They're not all starters, but they're rosterable players, which you could not say that about the Jets offensive tackle room last year. I don't even know if they had 4 at this time last year on the roster.
And Mitchell was a rookie, so you got to grade it on a curve there.
Exactly. And so I think that they've really, in terms of the depth of the offensive line, it's crazy to say this. It's one of the deepest position groups on the entire roster. They have 12 NFL caliber offensive linemen on their roster. They're probably going to carry 9, maybe 10 tops, right? Guys like Tristan Colon, who they signed in the offseason. Right now, if it's a healthy room, he's not making the team. I don't think Cedric Ogbuehi makes the team, and I'm not sure what they do at tackle. If everyone is healthy, which obviously they're protecting themselves if that's not the case, and it's, I don't know, foolish to assume full health. But if everyone is healthy, you have Dwayne Brown, Mekhi Becton, Billy Turner, Max Mitchell, Carter Warren. That's 5 offensive tackles. I don't know if there's a single team that carried 5 offensive tackles on their 53-man roster week 1 last year. That's rare. So it's uncommon for that to be the case. I don't know what their plan is. I don't know what they do.
Well, Turner does have versatility, doesn't he, though, at guard?
Carter Warren?
Billy Turner.
Oh, Billy Turner. Yes, Billy Turner absolutely does have versatility. He's played all 5 offensive line positions outside of center. Most of his experience comes at right guard and right tackle. And that's like, I know Packers fans kind of like mocked it when he was signed. Dolphins fans also hate him. Billy Turner has 75 career starts. He started 61 games over the last 5 years, something like that. He's not a bad player. Like, he's a bad starter. If he's a starting
He got
player,
overpaid was the problem, and then people
yeah.
expectations changed.
If he's a starter on your team, that's not good. He's your weakest link for sure. But as depth, he's a good depth piece. I mean, the Jets offensive line, they got Connor McGovern or Joe Tippman as one of their backups. That's really good. Wes Schweitzer is a good backup. Billy Turner is a good backup. Max Mitchell, I think, is a good backup. The Jets offensive line is super deep. I'm very interested to see how it all shakes out. But I'm cautiously optimistic about the Jets offensive line going into 2023.
It almost reminds me what Douglas is doing of almost what Kyle Shanahan is doing with the quarterbacks this year, where he just had every single injury known to man. He's like, all right, I'll carry 6 quarterbacks. I don't care. I'm just not having what happened last year happen to me again. And, you know, I've been critical of Joe Douglas because supposedly he came in as the offensive line mastermind and the big hog molly guy. And he's built offensive lines that normally have had a couple above average players, but just collectively they were never quite there. Even though the offensive line, I thought last year was not as bad as people said it was. I thought it was probably league average, even without Vera Tucker. They kind of were plotting there, and then Zach Wilson would hold the ball for 5 seconds and get sacked, so it made it look worse than it is. And some Zach Wilson fans didn't want to admit that he sucked, so they just blamed the offensive line, which is what fans do when they like their quarterback and they're trying to make excuses. This year, I like their offensive line for the first time in a very long time. With Vera Tucker coming back, if Becton's healthy, we don't know who's going to be the starting center, but you either get a proven, I would say, solid NFL center or a standout rookie that the Jets were incredibly high on. And then Dwayne Brown, who was playing hurt and he's still was very effective and they absolutely love him and he's a leader. This is finally something you could be like, all right, now we're cooking with something, which I know Aaron Rodgers can move, but the dude's 39. You got to keep this dude upright in the pocket. So
for sure,
not mission accomplished, but mission on the way to potentially being accomplished, which the Jets couldn't say last year. So
I think the thing that they've done best is they've significantly raised the floor of the offensive line. I don't think the ceiling is significantly higher than it was last year, although a healthy and motivated and you know, Mekhi Becton reaching his ceiling, that raises the ceiling quite a bit. But the floor is just so much higher. Like I said before, they had 7 different offensive tackles. If you include Elijah Vera Tucker in that conversation, spend time on the injured reserve last year. That's crazy. I think it was per Football Outsiders numbers, no other team had more offensive linemen injuries than the Jets. Even like the Rams, who I know they had a bunch of injuries there. The Broncos had a bunch of injuries there. I think the Jets beat them all. Now their defense was incredibly healthy, so it kind of balanced out a little bit, but they were really beat up last year. They protected themselves now so that if they get those injuries, because injuries are going to happen, we know it, it's football. They've really protected themselves. They have a lot of quality depth. Yeah, I'm excited about it. I don't think they're going to be a top 8 offensive line in football, but I think that their floor is so much higher. I don't think they're going to be a bottom 10 offensive line. And really that's all you kind of want going into this year, because you have a pretty good skill position group. You have Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback. As long as you are protecting yourselves and you're protecting your quarterback, you should be in good shape.
You know who I'm excited for, Justin?
Who are you excited for?
Will McDonald.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in the NFL draft, the Jets, I would say, pulled off one of the more stunning picks, and not in a mouth agape, oh my goodness, what is happening way, but just something that I didn't see any mock drafts making this pick. So right after Broderick Jones, who was kind of the last of the consensus top 4 offensive tackles, went off the board at 14 to the Steelers following a trade up with the Patriots. The Jets do not trade down, which I can't really. People go, oh, why didn't he trade down? Sometimes the team wants to trade up and didn't have any. It's hard to get trades down, hard to move around the order. Joe Douglas stays at number 15, and he takes Will McDonald, a defensive end from Iowa State. And this move, boy, in the immediate reactions, I mean, Jets fans acted like they just took a guy who's like a 5th-round talent. I mean, they couldn't believe this pick. They were beside themselves. And looking back on it, I even said this live, I liked when he got picked live in the Fanside NFL Draft Show, which I hope you guys checked out. I compared it to why I didn't really hate the Jahmyr Gibbs pick a lot for the Lions, in that I like the player so much that it's really hard for me to be too disappointed about where he got picked. Was it higher than where I had him going? Absolutely. Would he be my number 1 defensive end at that point? No, I probably would have wanted Nolan Smith, but they really were not that far apart on my big board. I really think McDonald's going to be a high-end producer in this league. As we mentioned before, he's not a great run defender right now. He's only about 235 pounds, but as Robert Saleh mentioned, he was basically playing out of position his last year at Iowa State. He was playing at the 4i, which for those who don't know, is in between a guard and a tackle. That's like a defensive. That's where Quinn Williams plays 4-eye sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And they have Will McDonald playing there at 235. So when he played in more of a traditional edge rusher role in his past 2 seasons at Iowa State, he had 10.5 and 11.5 sacks, and he helped set the all-time Big 12 record, which, Justin, do you know who number 2 in the Big 12 is all-time?
It's Von Miller, right?
It is Von Miller. So Von Miller, for the rest of time, will not have as many Big 12 sacks as Will McDonald. That's the kind of college career he had at Iowa State. Extremely bendy, very quick off the line, 10 forced fumbles too, so this guy generates turnovers. This seemed like a Robert Saleh pick. This is a guy that Robert Saleh very clearly fell in love with at the Senior Bowl. Everybody's seen that clip going around of him spitting around Darnell Wright, who got picked 10th overall by the Bears. Were there positions that probably had a more immediate need? I'd say so. Was defensive end, I still think, an area that they need to address at some point in the draft? Absolutely. They just did it a little earlier than I think some expected, but they still ended up with a really good prospect and a guy who, if you're going to believe the reports, Carolina really liked and was going to trade up to get at the end of the first round. So if you didn't get him at 15, you weren't going to get him. And it seems like they just loved him that much as a prospect.
I think you're definitely right about one thing. This was 100% a Robert Saleh pick. Like
right.
Through and through, this is a guy that I'm sure Robert Saleh fell in love with, like you said, at the Senior Bowl. The Jets have had a habit over the last couple of drafts now of drafting guys who were standouts at the Senior Bowl. Of course, they were helping coach there last year. This year they weren't, and they still drafted a few guys from the Senior Bowl. Will McDonald, of course, being the most notable at this point. I'll take an optimistic stance on this first before I kind of give my candid thoughts on it, because I don't love the pick as much as you do. I was vocal about it on Twitter that I didn't like it immediately. And it's not necessarily because of Will McDonald. It's more because of, like you mentioned, the immediate impact thing. But I'll take an optimistic stance first. I think he's going to be a much more productive player and a more effective player in the NFL than he was in college. And like you mentioned, he's the all-time Big 12 sack leader. Getting him out of that 4-eye, which Robert Saleh, if anyone has any concerns about them doing that, he literally mentioned it in his draft call to Will McDonald. He said they were to get him out of that 4-eye and into the wide 9, that's Robert Saleh's specialty. He helped develop that, or he helped start running that in San Francisco, and it worked wonders for the 49ers. Getting a guy like Will McDonald, who, he's undersized, but one of the twitchiest, bendiest, most athletic outside linebackers or edge rushers, whatever you want to say, in this draft, getting him in that wide 9, getting him far outside the tackle box and letting him use that speed and bendability, it's going to be huge for him. It's going to be so much better than him lining up as basically a 3-4 defensive end, because that's pretty much where Iowa State had him lining up a lot. And I think within a couple years, he could develop into a really, really good pass rusher. I don't know if his role will be significant early on. In fact, I don't think it will. But I think in a couple of years, you're talking about a guy who can be really good. And of course, Carl Lawson's on the last year of his deal. Bryce Huff's on the last year of his deal. Seems like there's a decent chance the Jets don't re-sign both or either of them. Maybe neither comes back. So I think that this is a pick very much for the future as much as it is for 23. However, that being said, that is part of the reason I don't like the pick. I think you have a very small window with Aaron Rodgers. I don't, obviously no one knows if he's going to play past 1 year. Right now, we think he will. Right now, we assume he will. We have no idea what's going to happen over the next 9-10 months. We have no clue, right? There's every possibility that this is the only year you have Aaron Rodgers. We have no idea. You have a very tiny window. I think drafting a guy who is basically going to replace Bryce Huff as your third down pass rusher, who's maybe going to play 15, 20% of snaps, because that's pretty much what Bryce Huff played last year. I think that is not how I would want to use a first-round pick. You have a relatively premium pick at pick 15. There were other players on the board who I think would have made a significantly larger impact, not only in year one, but still be cornerstone players. Jackson Smith-Njigba immediately comes to mind. That would have been my pick there. I think immediately he steps in as your wide receiver 2. You can cut Corey Davis. You double your yeah. I mean, you think
I think Lazard would still be the 2. And
I disagree. I think he'll be in the slot. Obviously, he would play slot. Lazard to be on the outside as well as Garrett Wilson.
And obviously wouldn't preclude drafting somebody because of Mecole Hardman. But if we're to believe the Jets, they supposedly love Mecole Hardman and want to give him an advanced role. So, I mean,
I would much rather have Jackson Smith-Njigba in the slot than Mecole Hardman. And that's not because I'm down on Mecole Hardman. I think Jackson Smith-Njigba was the best receiver in his draft class. And I think he's someone who, if he was in the right system and right scheme, can immediately come in and be a 1,000-yard receiver in the NFL. I truly believe that about him. I believe in the Ohio State pipeline. We've seen it with Garrett Wilson, with Chris Olave. I hope we see it eventually with Jamison Williams. I know he transferred to Alabama, but I think we'll eventually see it with him. We're going to see it with Marvin Harrison Jr. Like that Ohio State pipeline of receivers is just crazy. And Jackson,
I thought I was high on Jackson Smith and Jigba. Oh my God.
I think he's one of the favorites for rookie of the year. Like I think he's a great player, and I think he would have absolutely made a larger impact than Will McDonald will make early in his career. And that's not to say that Will McDonald can't be a good player down the line, and I think he might be a very good player. And I think in this Jet scheme, he could be really good, especially with Robert Saleh, coaching him up, getting him in that wide nine. I just think he's not a guy that's going to play on early downs at all right now. Hopefully he can eventually be that guy, but he's not going to do that. He's not playing on first and second now because he's not a good run defender. He's still undersized. He's basically filling the Bryce Huff role. And my other issue with it is Bryce Huff is already a good player. Like Bryce Huff is one of the most efficient pass rushers in the entire NFL last year, right? Like you had a really good player. I know that Will McDonald is a much better athlete than Bryce Huff. I know he's twitchier than Bryce Huff, but Bryce Huff thrived in that Bryce Huff role. Now I don't even know what his role on the roster is. I said this on Twitter and people gave me shit for it. I don't know if he's going to be active on game days. Do you think the Jets are going to have 6 defensive ends active on game days? Because I don't. Like I expect them to add another defensive tackle at some point, whether it's Al Woods. I think they'll get another one tech in there. And you're going to have four defensive tackles active on game days. You're going to have Quinnen Williams, whoever that guy is, maybe it's Al Woods, whatever, Solomon Thomas, and Quentin Jefferson. Those are going to be your 4 defensive tackles. I think the odd man out is Bryce Huff because I think Michael Clemens and John Franklin Myers give you the versatility to play inside. Also, Michael Clemens played special teams last year, which Bryce Huff, I don't believe, played special teams. So that's another edge to Michael Clemens. I think you're basically just phasing Bryce Huff out of the rotation in favor of a guy who, yeah, I think he's very talented and I think he could be really good, but you already had a guy who can fill that role. And I think there were just better options for them. I want to also go to chat really quick. I know I've talked a lot here, but Nick Trusnebeck said in chat, Kincaid could have solved all your problems. I would have liked Dalton Kincaid over Will McDonald. I would have, because I think
Jeremy Ruckert's just gone then.
Look, man, you know how much I love Jeremy Ruckert for personal reasons as well. I don't know what his role is going to be this year. I don't know what he's going to do. He had a very quiet rookie season. Dalton Kincaid is a great, great talent. And I think he would have been, you know how I've been vocal this entire offseason about how I think the Jets need one more playmaker in this skill position group, in this receiving core. Dalton Kincaid, I think, is that guy. I think Jackson Smith and Jigba would have been that guy. Right now, it's fine. They have a fine wide receiver room. I'm happy with the depth. They have really good depth there. But I think getting a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba in there, getting someone like Dalton Kincaid in there, because you could play that dude at wide receiver. You can play him as a big slot. You can absolutely do that. I think either of them would have made a larger impact than Will McDonald. And so that's where I am about it. I don't hate the player, and I think he could be really good. And in a couple of years, it might look like a great pick. I think year one, it's not where I would have gone with it.
Here's where I would push back on that because, like, all right, Smith and Jigba, I think definitely would have had a role if the Jets picked him. Like, would you bet anything, like, assuredly stamp it, he's going to have a bigger role in the passing game than Allen Lazard? I don't know if I would.
I wouldn't assuredly say it, but I would think it. I would think it going into the season. I think he would be the number 2 leading receiver by the end of the year. That's where that's my expectation.
Where the problems I'm having with some of the narratives on Jets Twitter are 2 things. Number one, if you draft a guy 15th overall, like, all right, he might play a smaller role in year 1, but I imagine they're not going to keep him in the Bryce Huff role for his entire career. They drafted him to be a defensive cornerstone. So they're not just going to stick him there for 4 years. The Jets did not draft a guy who's a depth piece 15th overall. They drafted a guy I think is going to be a starter for 10 years, 15th overall. So I imagine they're going to find ways by hook or by crook. Maybe they move Franklin Myers inside in a more permanent role. I don't know if I love it, but I think it would make sense. They're going to get Will McDonald on the field come hell or high water this year and next year. They're going to figure out some sort of way. The biggest problem I have, maybe, I don't know, because I don't think you would describe the draft like this, I've seen this a lot with big names, people I respect, people who know what they're talking about. They didn't go all in on this draft. They didn't have an all-in draft. Is that like an oxymoron? Is there such thing as an all-in draft? Like, I get that. Look, the Jets picked defensive rookie of the year, Sauce Gardner, offensive rookie of the year, Garrett Wilson, and presumed offensive rookie of the year, if he would have stayed healthy, Breece Hall. That does not happen all the time. And the Jets also did not draft Breece Hall like, oh, we're going to go all in. Like, the draft is for supplementing, and it's for this year, but also the next couple years down the line. That's what it's for. You could accentuate and get win now pieces in free agency. The draft is where you build your roster in a more sustainable way. This idea that, they should have gone all in on, I saw all in applied to a tackle. That tackle might not even start.
Agreed.
Like, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. And I think that also Jets Twitter has been kind of warming to me. I think that was part of it too, is that Nolan Smith was on the board, and Nolan Smith was a 5-star recruit, number 1 overall, very visible. He was at Georgia all the time. Will McDonald at Iowa State wasn't on your TVs every Saturday, so there just wasn't as much, clips of him getting around. I think the more they looked at Will McDonald, they're like, okay, I think we got something here if we use him right. And I think too, like we were talking earlier about the whole 4-eye wide 9 thing. I mean, I don't think it's really been illustrated how egregious and how awful that was by the Iowa State coaching staff, who, by the way, were getting NFL looks. Remember Matt Campbell getting NFL looks, and now he's winning like 7 games with Brees Hall.
Matt Campbell put out a tweet that said something like "Go Jets" the other day. It was like during a draft, and I'm like I think I saw someone on Twitter say, "Imagine like a Jets fan saw that tweet like 4 years ago, like would have lost their minds.
They would have lost their mind." Like, yeah, but so Matt Campbell and this coaching staff, I don't know who the defensive coordinator is off the top of my head, but like he's 235 pounds. If Von Miller was playing 4-tech right now, like people would run Sean McDermott out of town.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. And then let's just imagine hypothetically, let's go back to 2022. Let's say Will McDonald declared after that year off back-to-back 10.5 and 11.5 sack seasons with a lot of the same testing numbers and no decline in production, no weird 4-eye stuff. I think he might go higher than this. I think that's the kind of talent the Jets think they have. And you know what? You can't talk all this like we love Robert Saleh, we love Joe Douglas stuff. Like, I get he's made some mistakes. I feel like he's built up enough equity to kind of get one of his guys and take a little bit of a risk, in my estimation.
The NFL draft, it's all about projecting. Like we see these players in college, and just because somebody is super productive in college or great in college, that doesn't mean they're going to be great in the NFL. The Jets saw Will McDonald. They saw he was playing out of position. They saw his natural talents, his abilities, and they said, when we get him in this building and we put him in our scheme, we think he's going to be a 10-sack guy. Like that's what they're thinking. That's why they drafted him. And I get that. I don't have any issues with that line of thought. I think, and I don't fully agree with the whole, like, oh, they didn't go all in. I don't fully agree with that narrative. I think it's a kind of a silly narrative. But the reason that narrative exists is because of the Will McDonald pick. That's the reason why. I don't think anybody is thinking that because of the Joe Tippman pick. I don't think they're thinking of it because of any of the day 3 guys. They're looking at Will McDonald and they're saying, okay, he's going to be a backup edge rusher. He's going to be a guy who's maybe your 4th or 5th edge rusher in terms of snaps. I legitimately think that. I don't think he's playing more than 20, assuming full health. Of course, this is assuming full health. If Carl Lawson gets hurt or whoever gets hurt, this completely changes, right? But if everyone's healthy, like they were last year, I don't think he's playing any more than 20, 25% of snaps this year, because that's what Jermaine Johnson played last year. Jermaine Johnson played like 25% of snaps, and he can play on early downs. Like, I don't think Will McDonald's going to play on early downs. Jermaine Johnson does. Michael Clemens does. The only guy that you can compare him to, I think, is Bryce Huff. And so that's why I don't particularly like the pick. I think there were just better options. I think there were guys who could help you in the future and the present. I don't really think Will McDonald helps you a ton in the present. However, I do get the projection. I get it. And also, you mentioned this earlier. I think this is something that the Jets are really looking forward to. He has a nose for the football. That dude forces fumbles like no one's business, right? So that, I think, is another aspect of it. Now, if the Jets can just learn to,
recover them,
recover fumbles, maybe we'll have something here. But they should be able to force fumbles this year.
Let me put you on the spot really quick.
Okay.
Who do you think has a better chance of earning a second contract with the Jets, Jermaine Johnson or Will McDonald?
I'll say Will McDonald. I'll say Will McDonald, because I not that Jermaine Johnson was bad as a rookie. I think he was fine. I think he had a fine rookie season. I do want to see more snaps from this year, which another reason that, I don't particularly love the Will McDonald pick, because I don't think that's going to happen now. But I think given what I saw from Jermaine Johnson in year 1, I'll lean towards Will McDonald. Hopefully they both get second contracts. Hopefully you go, into the future where Will McDonald can be your Carl Lawson replacement and Jermaine Johnson can be your John Franklin Myers replacement. Like, that's kind of what I'd hope for. I think McDonald's even a better athlete than Carl Lawson at this stage. He's twitchier. Lawson wins a lot with power as well. I think they're different kinds of players, but I think that's kind of what their roles will be. Ideally, that's the future, but I will say Will McDonald. That's what I'll say for that.
So the Jets take McDonald, and then in the second round, they go offensive line in a move that I think many were extremely excited about. When they selected Wisconsin center Joe Tippman with the 43rd overall pick. And funny enough, in my mock draft, I believe I actually made a revision later. I had them going with Adebawore before he fell, but then I had John Michael Schmitz to them in the second round, and then Tippman to the Giants, and then they ended up flip-flopping. But Tippman, to me, I know there's going to be a whole Connor McGovern I almost said Conor McGregor again, Conor McGovern battle that's going to go on. I think you obviously don't want to go in with any preconceived notions, but I think if it's a tie, I'd rather give it to Joe Tippman, a guy who, although he's a big center, 6'6", you don't see many 6'6" centers walking around town in the NFL right now. Only one sack allowed in his 2 years at Wisconsin, and that was against NFL athletes, NFL defensive tackles all the time. Not SEC level, but pretty consistently week one, week in and week out. Mm-hmm. You get a guy who, it was really weird how they described his versatility, because I believe ESPN said he had the ability to end up switching over to guard, and then NFL Network said he did not, and he's a pure center. It's a little bit weird, but I think just with his ability to move in the open field, get to the second level well, I think if they really needed him to play guard, he probably could. It's like a Vera Tucker and tackle, I think, is a good comparison. If you really needed him to, he could hold his own. And he's a guy, too, who comes from a great pipeline. Like, you never want a helmet scout, because that's how you end up sometimes with D. Milliner, and that's how you end up not taking Patrick Mahomes and things of that nature. But Wisconsin offensive linemen usually have been made pretty easy transitions to the pros. So I really don't think Tippman's going to be overwhelmed by the transition, and I think he's probably by the end of the year going to end up being the center. I don't know if McGovern starts. I don't know if Tippman starts the whole way, but I think they drafted him with the expectation that he's going to be Aaron Rodgers center for quite a long time, or at least as long as Aaron Rodgers is here.
Definitely. I'm completely with you there. I think when they re-signed Conor McGovern, and we saw what the contract was, which is an absurdly cheap contract. I know we've talked about it already in the show. Absurdly cheap for a guy who is a legitimately, at worst, average starting center the last couple of years. At worst, I think he's been an average starting center. But when we saw the contract they gave him, it was pretty clear that this did not preclude them from drafting a center, because I don't know if they saw McGovern when they re-signed him as definitely, I know they didn't. They did not see him as definitely a guy who's going to start at center. And so it was not a surprise at all when day 2, 43 overall, they took Joe Tippman. I know some Jets fans were higher on John Michael Schmitz. I get it. Joe Tippman's the better athlete. That's why they went with him. Again, it's all about projecting in the NFL. They looked at Joe Tippman. They saw how he can get out in space, his ability is, when he can pull, just basically how he can get up into the second level. And I think that they like that more than what John Michael Schmitz can do there. I think John Michael Schmitz is a safer, higher floor prospect because, one, he's older, too. And I think he's a little more technically sound than Tippman at this stage. But I really like that pick. I think that Joe Tippman has every opportunity to come in and win that starting center job come week 1. And with the versatility stuff, he only played center at Wisconsin, I believe. He only played center in college. But I think a lot of teams are projecting him that he can play guard because of that athleticism, because of his ability to get out in space. Also, a lot more 6'6" guards than centers. So I think that's part of it as well. So I think that it's kind of just projecting there. He doesn't really have a ton of experience playing guard. He definitely didn't play it at all in college, but I think it's more teams are looking at him and saying, we think this guy can play guard. And I'm sure some teams worked him out in the pre-draft process at guard. I think I've seen some NFL comparisons to like a guy like Mitch Morse. I think that makes sense. Just kind of a taller center as well, a big guy. I don't know if Joe Tippman's ever going to be a top 5 center in the NFL. Maybe he will be. I hope he does. But I think he's going to be a long-term starter. And that's what the Jets were eyeing there. They improved their offensive line. Again, added so much more versatility and depth to that line, because we talked about it before, how much depth they have. They have so much flexibility too. Like, they have got almost every single one of their backups can play on multiple positions. Billy Turner can play tackle and guard. You got Conor McGovern and Joe Tippman can both play guard and center probably. We know McGovern can do it. Vera Tucker can play guard and tackle. Carter Warren's probably going to be your left tackle. You got a guy like Cedric Ogbuehi who can play both tackle spots. They have a ton of versatility in the offensive line. Wes Schweitzer, guard and center. Like, they have so much flexibility. They're protecting themselves. I think that's what the Joe Tippman pick is, and as well as a guy who you hope is a long-term starter.
And I believe that Tippman was also, there were rumors that the Jets were looking to move up into the late first round.
Yes, there was.
To get Joe Tippman. Some may not like the idea of drafting a center just on principle, because for some reason you don't really see a ton of first round centers. And there's a lot of we found our center in the 3rd round. It was like running back stuff. Mm-hmm. We found our guy late. This is interesting. I found it. I think since the current rookie salary scale and the 5th-year option kind of kicked in, although Tippman wasn't picked in the 1st round, I think this kind of speaks to how important the pick was and why it's a good selection. There have been 8 centers picked in the 1st round, and 7 had their 5th-year option picked up.
Is Billy Price is the one who didn't, right?
Billy Price is the one who didn't.
I loved Billy Price, man. That makes me sad. I love Billy Price.
Billy Price. It was weird because he was so strong in college, and he just goes to the NFL. It was like the air came out of the balloon, Dracula. You turn the lights on, he just turns to dust.
Yeah,
It was really strange.
I don't know
But
what happened with him.
but hopefully he's not a Billy Price. The point being, typically investing in centers with a pick like this has been pretty fruitful. And it's not a position like center is not just like a plug and play offensive position where you just go throw a guy on here and like you're making calls at the line. You're doing a lot of stuff. Like that's it's quarterback of the offensive line. So if he ends up becoming even an above average center, this is a guy who legitimately could be on the Jets for 10 years. To get that 43rd overall, I think not only did I think it solidified the fact the Jets won on day 2 without moving around. I think that made him a big day 2 winner. I think it made him they had a better first 3 rounds than the Packers, I think, in totality, which is funny too. Because now if you look at the Aaron Rodgers trade, if you look at it in context of picks, it looks a lot scarier. When you look at it as, they traded away Luke Musgrave, who a guy I like as a prospect, but he's not going to be a great blocker, and then immediately got his impact kind of nullified because they took another tight end and Tucker Kraft later, and Lucas Van Ness, a guy who didn't even start in college. I think it's making the Jets trade look even better because they gave away a pick and they still landed Joe Tippman. That's pretty good, Joe Douglas.
I agree. Really quick, Brian in chat said Garrett Bradbury did not get his option exercised. That's true. They did extend him though. He got that. I think it was a 3-year extension. So, you are right. They did not exercise his 5th-year option, but he did end up getting extended. So
he at least improves. I remember his rookie year he was awful, and then he got at least somewhat better. Yep. So going on to day 3, because boy oh boy did the Jets actually make some good day 3 picks. As we mentioned, Carter Warren, who Justin will get right up on with the Jet Press because he did a nice little interview with Carter Warren. You can see that a little bit later when it's up. Carter Warren is a guy who I think, like Will McDonald, the last year in college hurt him a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I think if he either declared or did like a Jamar Chase and just sat out and prepared for the draft, I think he's a day 2 guy. And now, obviously, he only played, I think, 5 games this last year, and he did not look amazing in those games when compared to his 2022 or 2021 film. But when he's healthy, really long arms, powerful runner, plays angry, and he blocked for another great Jet running back we'll discuss later. I think he's in that Max Mitchell camp where if Carter Warren is going to end up starting like most of the games for the Jets and something has gone terribly wrong, and I think Carter Warren would even probably tell you that himself deep down, but I think he's got so much to work with where eventually I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up starting at some point in the NFL. He reminds me of, I think he might be this level player, like a Brandon Shell type, where there's enough where if a guy gets hurt and he might miss a game or 2, you can feel perfectly comfortable with Carter Warren coming right in. And if he stays healthy and everything clicks with his length and how aggressively he plays the game, I think that there's a slight chance he end up being an average starter in this league, which for a 4th-round pick, it's a pretty good haul.
Yeah, you're drafting him to be a developmental tackle, which is exactly what they did with Max Mitchell last year. Basically, Max Mitchell is going to be your developmental right tackle. Carter Warren's your developmental left tackle. That's kind of how I'm reading this. That's kind of how I'm just assuming this is going to be. I don't know, what's going to happen with Mekhi Becton. Maybe he can eventually win back that left tackle job. Maybe next year, maybe this year, whatever. But right now, Dwayne Brown is probably your left tackle. Maybe Carter Warren has a chance to start as soon as 2024 if he really develops this year. And they obviously they love his athleticism, they love his upside. Maybe he could be a guy that develops into a starter next year. Of course, like you mentioned, he had that knee injury last year, played like 4 or 5 games. He barely played. So I think that definitely hurt his draft stock. He seems to be completely healthy now. He seems to be fully healed. I think he's just somebody they're going to bring in, hope to develop into a potential starter of the future. And again, he just gives you more depth along that offensive line, which is something the Jets desperately, desperately need. So I like the pick. They obviously didn't address tackle earlier, kind of not really fully their fault. I mean, the top 4 all went before they picked. Although, based on what I've seen, I think that the Jets plan to take Will McDonald over Broderick Jones regardless. And even over both of those guys, they plan to take Jahmyr Gibbs, which we don't got to dive into that necessarily, but that's pretty wild that they plan to take a running back. And I know you love Gibbs, but that's still wild. But
that would have been wilder than McDonald. I know Gibbs was like pretty much a wide receiver with how much they used him like that at Bama, but That would have been, at least the Lions immediately traded DeAndre Swift and said Jahmyr Gibbs is our guy, and that makes it better. Like, that would have at least been like, yeah, okay, this is one way to make a big board.
That would have been like even worse than when the Jags took Travis Etienne. Like, they got a lot of like blowback for that when they took Travis Etienne because they already had James Robinson. It would be even worse than that because you have Breece Hall and you took him at 15.
And Etienne was really good last year.
He was. No, I'm not even saying it was a bad pick. I'm just, at the time, people were like, what the hell is Urban Meyer doing? What is he doing? And
My favorite part about that pick is he openly admitted in the press conference that he didn't want him because he's like, oh, yeah, we wanted Kadarius Toney, but he was gone, so we just took him. We're like,
Urban
what?
Meyer. What a guy, Urban Meyer. What
a guy.
But yeah, I think Carter Warren, you're hoping he can develop into a future starter. And right now, he's quality depth, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Now, let me ask you another question. I'm putting you on the spot a lot today.
That's fine.
Favorite day 3 pick? If you had to single out one, was it Carter Warren?
I think it's the guy that would be up next. Izzy Abanikanda. I think that I'd say that is my favorite day 3 pick. I mean, for personal reasons, I love that the Jets drafted Jarek Bernard Converse because I got to talk to him before the draft, and that was fun. And I do love the Zach Kuntz pick. I think in terms of fun, that's a really fun pick. But I think in terms of a guy who I think can have an immediate impact and potentially be a really, really good player down the line, it's probably Izzy Abanikanda.
Now, Abanikanda, for those of you that don't know, is a speed, and more speed running back prospect that I think is probably going to start the year as the 3rd running back on the depth chart behind Breece Hall, obviously, and then Michael Carter with him and Zonovan Bam Knight kind of fighting for space. And is it unreasonable to say I think by the end of the year he could be RB2 just because Michael Carter, by the end of last year, man, he really was laboring out there. Like, for a guy that drafted to be a big explosive home run hitter, as consistent as he was and as he can kind of churn out tough yards, he was not hitting the home runs that he was at North Carolina. Abanikanda's game is all home runs, 1,400 yards, 6 yards a carry, 20 touchdowns during his last year at Pitt, including one game against, I believe, Virginia Tech, where he ran for 320 yards on 8.9 yards a carry with 6 touchdowns, which is just unreal.
Video game stuff.
If there are concerns with Abanikanda, it's this. Number one, he's only had the 1-year production, which for a running back, I'm not going to freak out about because they have you don't want him getting 900 carries in college. That could be a little bit of a warning sign. And the fact that his contact balance for a back as big as he isn't really amazing. Like, he's a speed guy, but he's built I think he's 215. He's built like a between the tackles guy. So it's kind of like a weird fit that the Jets have to kind of reconcile. The other concern, too, is if you look at the numbers, he had of the 20 touchdowns he had, 10 of the 20 came against Virginia Tech and Rhode Island in 2 games, which, I mean, Rhode Island, like, go Rams and all that, but, I mean, they're not pumping out NFL players every year. And then he also had his second biggest game was an overtime game against Tennessee, who has a good offense. The defense, I thought, was kind of mid. And then Western Michigan was his next highest game. So I don't know if the production is necessarily 100% going to tell the story of Abanikanda. I do know for a fact that the speed is real, the home run potential is real, and the kickoff return potential is real. They mentioned that. So expect to see a lot of Israel Abanikanda during his rookie season, more so than for most 5th-round picks.
I definitely think there is a very real chance that he takes over that RB2 role with the Jets. I know Michael Carter had a very good rookie season, and a lot of fans were high on him, but he disappointed last year. Like, he underwhelmed. I don't know what it was, but he looked slower. He looked a step slow. I don't know. I don't even know exactly what happened. Maybe he was playing hurt. Haven't heard anything about that. But it was a major difference when Breece Hall went down. And it's not just because of Breece Hall. Like, there was a very noticeable difference. And then, later in the year, Bam Knight took over that role from Michael Carter. Like, he became the guy for a couple of games. And it's because Bam Knight was more productive at times than Michael Carter. I don't think
let's say he regressed to the mean pretty hard.
He did. Like, he's clearly not as well-rounded as Michael Carter, but there was a reason for that. He even got some Ty Johnson snaps later in the year. So I think the Jets realized that they, as much as I like Michael Carter and he seems like a great guy and he's hilarious, I think that they really wanted to upgrade that RB2 role this year. And I think Abanikanda could be that guy. Like, he 100% could be that guy. You mentioned the speed. I know he ran a 4.44, I think, at his combine. He's been clocked as running a 4.29, like an unofficial 4.29.
Really? That fast?
Yep. Again, it's an unofficial time, but I've seen that he ran a 4.29. I don't know if it was that. It definitely wasn't at a pro day. It would have been more publicized than that. But that's the kind of speed we're talking about. Like, get this guy in open space. He is electric. And I think that's exactly what the Jets wanted in a running back, because you look at Michael Carter, he's just not that guy. Like, he's not an explosive breakaway speed runner. If he gets an open space, he's not going to, be able to turn a potential 5-yard gain into a touchdown. Like, he's not necessarily that guy. He's a grinder. That's where I think he's at his best. He fights for extra yards. He's a tough runner, but they wanted that explosiveness. They want this offense to be super explosive. That's why they went out and signed Mecole Hardman. And that's why they're drafting a guy like Izzy Abanikanda, because he can do that. And I think you lost that because, the Jets released Ty Johnson last month, I believe it was, with an injury designation. Not sure what's going on there, but I hope he's all right. But they kind of lost that speed element with Ty Johnson, because Zonovan Knight isn't necessarily a breakaway speed guy. Michael Carter isn't that. Breece Hall absolutely can be, but you want to change a pace guy that can come off the bench and fill that role. I think Izzy Abanikanda does that, and I would not be surprised at all if he's RB2 by the end of the year.
Even though Abanikanda was a good pick, my favorite day 3 pick was the RAS Wizard. So for those that don't know what RAS is, it stands for Relative Athletic Score. It's a popular draft metric used to gauge athletic ability. Essentially, on a scale of 0 to 10, they take, your height, your weight, and then certain like explosion drills, like your verticality, your broad jump, your speed, your 40 time and your 20 time, and then your agility, your shuttle, your 3-cone, and your bench press, and they round it all into one metric, of course. Closer to 10 you are, the more exceptional you are. And they grade it for positions and height and weight and all that. They drafted a guy who, going back to 1987, has the best number 1 relative athletic score of all tight ends for almost 30 years. And that is Zach Kuntz, the tight end from Old Dominion, who everybody was kind of shocked that he was there that late. I know I certainly was, but I think it was kind of like how Darnell Washington out of Adebawore fell, where there was clearly something medical. Now, with Washington out of Adebawore, it was probably something the teams found out that they were a little unsure about. With Kuntz, his things were very much out in the open. Like, he went to Penn State originally, big 5-star recruit at 6'8", 250, this big giant guy, looks like a power forward, and he ended up with 3 catches. And part of that was he had Pat Fryermuth ahead of him, and part of that was he just could never stay healthy. So when Ricky Rain, I believe is how you pronounce it, R-A-H-N-E, Ricky Ron?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, that sounds right.
Coach Rick goes to Old Dominion as the head coach. Kuntz goes with him. 2021, 73 catches, 692 yards, 5 touchdowns. So they're saying, all right, this year is going to be the big breakout year. 12 catches because he got hurt again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if he clicks, he reminded me, I think my comparison was Jelani Woods. And Jelani Woods went in the 3rd round last year to the Colts. And by the end of the year, he was pretty good. It was a lot of, he's not going to be nowhere near this good, but it was like Antonio Gates levels of just jump ball. Let's throw the ball anywhere near him, and he's just going to box people out like a basketball player and come down with it. He can be that kind of guy. And I think that we were joking earlier about, if they took Dalton Kincaid, Jeremy Ruckert's spot is pretty much gone. I mean, Jeremy Ruckert's going to have to fight for snaps this year, because I think Kuntz is probably going to end up either on the 53 or the practice squad. Like, I think the Jets want to hold on to this guy. And honestly, I don't think it would be out of the realm possibility if they say, you know what? If we find a way to move off Tyler Conklin, we find a way to move off CJ Uzomah, and then just go with whichever one of the veterans is left as tight end 1, Ruckert is 2, and then Kuntz is tight end 3. I think he's that special of an athletic prospect where they can do that. Like, the only reason he went this late was because of medicals. So if he stays healthy, Jets got to steal.
It's funny you mentioned Jelani Woods, because I'm pretty sure he was one of the only guys, because like you mentioned, the RAS score, Zach Kuntz scored a perfect 10
I think he broke Jelani Woods' record.
I believe Woods also had a 10. I believe they're two of 4 tight ends ever have received a perfect 10. And by the way, when we say ever, like, this is over 1,000, it's like over 1,100 tight ends that have been in this system since 1987, I think it was.
87. He's number 1.
Yeah, he's literally at the top. He's tied 10 out of 10. So Jelani Woods is a fair comparison. When you get this late in the draft, when you're in the 6th, 7th round, you're drafting 2 types of players. You're either drafting guys who you think can make an immediate impact on special teams and be just quality bottom of the roster players, or you're taking a guy like Zach Kuntz, who is just, it's a dart throw. It's a complete dart throw. You are hoping that because of his ridiculous athletic traits, and when I say ridiculous, I mean legitimately unprecedented, never before seen. Like, it's not even just rare. Calling him a rare athlete is underselling it. It's unprecedented. That's the type of player we're talking about. That's the kind of player you take in the 7th round. I loved it when they did it, because I thought it was, immediately I was like, this is going to be so much fun, right? Dude is 6'8", 255 pounds. He ran a 4.55, I believe it was, a 4.55 40-yard dash at 6'8", 255. that's not real. Like that
That's
shouldn't be possible.
preposterous.
That should not be possible.
You know what his vertical it was?
I mean, it was probably ridiculous. What was
40.
it?
40-inch vertical.
And
6'8".
He's 6'8".
250.
He could jump to a second store window. Like that's how big this dude is.
Nearly an 11-foot broad jump, just under 11 feet.
I said this when they drafted him. Even if his only role is put him on a field goal block, like literally just put him on the field goal.
Put him on
block.
the hands team.
Let him do this. Yeah, let him do this. Let him try it like Michael Clemens did it last year. Let him just stand there and put his hand up, jump. Maybe he'll block something. Like,
that's what I would do. I would draft like if there's like a 7'3" basketball player that doesn't make it, I'd be like, it's like a Belichick move. I'm like, just come in and just block field goals.
I feel like that's totally something that would have happened in like the 1960s NFL or something, where they just were like, this guy's so tall, let's just put him right here and let's see if he could block stuff. I feel like that actually is a thing. Like somebody tried to like put a guy at the goalpost or something. I feel like I've seen that story. I might be making it up.
They did change the rule eventually because I think guys used to be able to. That was when the goalpost used to be like at the in the front. I think a guy did that and they changed the rules.
Yeah, but I really love the Zach Kuntz pick. I don't know if he's ever going to be a decent player because legitimately he's a complete, like, he's such a work in progress. He's not a very strong blocker right now. He's not a very good route runner. I don't even know if his hands are that great, but they're
okay. They're okay.
Fine. Like for a guy that's that big, I probably would have liked to see him be better in contested catch situations because he's just so massive and just so much more physically dominating than everyone else he's playing against. But like just for the size alone, for the speed alone, and again, like you mentioned, he could have gone a lot higher if he didn't get hurt this year because he had a really good 2021, and unfortunately, I think it was an ACL injury this past year. So I think he could have gone third round like Jelani Woods did. I know it was a little bit of a surprise when Woods got drafted that high, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Kuntz got drafted earlier. It's just a fun pick. Like it's a super fun pick. I'm very excited about it. I'm happy about it. It's probably my favorite. Like just screw it. Like this is my favorite. Like just fun pick. Fun. I think fun is the best word to describe this pick.
So here's how we'll end the show with another quick on the spot Justin question.
Right,
if you had to grade this draft, letter grade.
I'd say I obviously this comes with the caveat of immediate draft grades are obviously silly. I think we all know that.
Yep.
But probably like a C plus. Probably a C plus.
Yeah, I think I'm a straight B. So
okay, that's fair. That honestly, the difference is literally just the Will McDonald pick. That's the difference.
We all like Tippman. We all like Abanikanda. It's Will McDonald.
I have zero issues with the other picks. I mean, Zaire Barnes is whatever. I think he's never going to be anything more than a special teams linebacker, but that's fine. It's a 6th round pick. Who cares? I like the Jarek Bernard Converse pick. Besides the fact that I interviewed him, I think he could genuinely be a pretty solid back of the roster depth piece who could potentially maybe develop into a starting safety in the future.
Some dime packages. I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't mind that pick, and I like the Carter Warren pick. I like the Zach Kuntz pick. I don't dislike this draft at all. I just the first round. That's what drops it to a C plus for me. But hey, I hope I'm wrong. I hope Will McDonald kicks ass this year. I hope he becomes a perennial All Pro. That's what I'm rooting for. I want to be wrong. I would love nothing more than to be wrong.
So you can find out if he'll be wrong by listening to the Jet Press podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts.
Can they?
Oh my goodness!
Can they? Is that how they'd find out?
That is salesmanship. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you get your podcasts, you can go find us over there, and you can find all of our wonderful YouTube content over at the Jet Press. We got shorts, we got interviews, we have the full podcast with the visual feed, so you get to see this ugly mug and Justin all the time, if that is your preferred. Hey, I didn't say I took the ugly mug for you, man.
I'll do the self-deprecation as well. Don't worry.
All right. So with that, that's how you go and check out all of our great content. Justin, the floor is yours for the sign-off.
Yes, sir. Yeah, like Mike just mentioned, we have a Carter Warren interview coming out very, very soon, possibly as soon as tomorrow. So keep an eye on that. We have one up with Jarek Bernard Converse that we did before the draft. So that's really fun. If you care at all about guys like Joey Fisher, Kobe Turner, Brandon Kipper, they're also up there. Yeah, we got a lot of stuff. We got a lot of content with the Jet Press. It's fun. Yeah, that's it. Oh, I won't be on the show next week. If anyone cares at all, I won't be. I'll be on vacation. Haha.
Well-earned PTO for Justin, man. He has been busting his ass. So
I haven't taken a vacation in a long time, so I'm very excited about it. But anyway, thank you all for joining us on the show today. You can follow Mike on Twitter at @ByMikeLuciano. You can follow me on Twitter at Justin T. Freed. Follow the Jet Press at the Jet Press. Download the Jet Press podcast wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, Overcast. Got to shout them out every time. Also, check us out on YouTube. Subscribe, like, hit that notification bell. You guys know what to do. We stream live every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all for listening to the Jet Press podcast. I've been Justin Freed. That's been Mike Luciano. See you guys next time.
See you folks next week.